All right, it is The Police. It is The Police's third album. I'm kind of surprised, actually, we didn't cover The Police's first
Yeah.
two albums. Matt, before you run the numbers, would you like to share the two albums that were not covered by CTS from The Police?
Yeah, it looks like their debut album was an album from 1978 called Outlandos d'Amour, and that was ranked. That was ranked number 184 in the 1970s on Best Ever Albums, and that's their third highest rated album, Best Ever Albums, and then one just ahead of it, 1979's Regatta de Blanc. So the early Police liked their French and their titles.
They did.
I guess.
And we will cover not just this album, but the remaining Police albums. Number 4 is Ghost in the Machine, and number 5 is Synchronicity. And then there are no Police anymore. So we'll get 3/5 of their
Which
catalog.
of the words Zenyatta or Mondatta are French? Are both of them French?
I'm saying neither.
Neither?
I was about to say, they don't look French either.
Yeah, they don't. I'm just, wonder where they're going with that. But Zenyatta Mondatta is their fifth highest rated album on Best Ever Albums. It comes in at number 176 in the 1980s, number 27 in 1980, number 1,123 of all time. It's their fifth highest rated album on Best Ever Albums. You said they have 5 total, right? So this is
correct.
The lowest ranked album on Best Ever Albums. So
yep.
So yeah, I'm going first on this, and so yeah, The Police is a band that I would say is one of the earliest bands that I can remember knowing and liking. Remember seeing their videos on MTV in the 80s, and another band that I was mostly familiar with due to the singles. I never owned any of their albums. My brother owned Synchronicity. I remember he had that on cassette tape. The only album that I ever owned from The Police was a greatest hits album, the classics, or what is it? It's Every Breath You Take, the classics, as opposed to Every Breath You Take, the singles. So they have, they have two. Yeah, there's two different compilation best of albums, and I had the classics, but not the singles. So, according to Best Ever Albums, I should have had the singles because that was better. Anyway, even though they probably had similar songs on them. So the songs on this I knew were the ones from pretty much the singles, but also I was familiar with not only Don't Stand So Close to Me and Da Do 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 Da 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 Da. I was familiar with some other songs like Driven to Tears, When the World is Running Down, You Make the Best of What's Around, and Canary in a Coal Mine. So there's a lot of there's like 5 or 6 songs on here that I pretty much knew. And so I very much like this album. The Police are an interesting band for me because they delve into the elements of ska that I have talked about in the past of not liking. But as I was listening to this record, I was reminded of the ska-ness of The Police, where they can be like that. And I'm fine with it, maybe because there's a lack of horns. And I can get down with a little bit more of the ska sound without the horns, and maybe that makes it cease to be ska. But I really like the Police's sound, their vibe. I love the guitar tone of Andy Summers' guitar. He's got kind of like a jangle guitar going on. But it's also can be very, very echoey, and and so I like that. They got some good choruses. It's very upbeat. A lot of these songs, and and I've always
sonically, correct?
Sonically, correct. Yes.
Okay, gotcha.
I'm always talking about the sonics.
Gotcha.
And I think Sting's got a great voice. He hits those high notes very easily, it seems. And Stuart Copeland's a great drummer. Complements what the band's doing very well. So I like this. Again, a lot of the stuff that I knew. They have a couple of instrumentals on here, like Behind My Camel. That's kind of a different type of song, kind of interesting.
A weird song.
Yeah,
it's scary.
Yeah, it's a little different. So that was kind of took me off guard a little bit. And then the last song on this album, The Other Way of Stopping, is another instrumental. So probably like that one a little bit better, I would say. But Man in a Suitcase was good. I I can't remember if I think I have heard that one before. So I think at some point I've heard all of these songs, but the ones
probably
I certainly
when Goldfinger covered it, right, Matt? That's where you stumbled across it.
Could be. I don't know.
That was a joke. Yeah.
In the ether, I've heard some Goldfinger stuff. So, so I'm thumbs up on this. I've always liked the Police. I know that they hate each other, or particularly Sting and Stuart Copeland. I did have the opportunity to see them live when they reunited in, I think it was 2007. The second Bonnaroo that I went to, they were headliners and had pretty good seats for that. So, that was a good show. The Police I've always liked them, and thumbs up on this.
So they weren't around too long, huh? I didn't know the lifespan of the band. It looked like only...
78 was first album, and 83 I think was Synchronicity, right?
Oh, wow.
Synchronicity was 83. Yes. Yep.
And they broke up because they hated each other. Is that what?
Sting wanted to do solo stuff.
Of course, yeah. Okay.
They all kind of did, but Sting especially did.
Like Stuart Copeland wanted to do a band called Oysterhead with Trey Anastasio and Les Claypool.
Okay.
Well, Sting,
15 years later.
I think they were supposed to. They took a hiatus, and then I think Sting. It was going to come back, but Sting wasn't sharing the songs he wrote. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
So I'll clean the stack now. Zenyatta Mondatta are made upwards, so they are not.
Oh, there you go.
They just went for something that rolled off the tongue, like their previous
like
album.
Do da da da.
Exactly. They like the onomatopoeia. So I'm kind of in the same boat with Matt. I know them from their singles and hearing them on the radio. I don't think I ever listened to an album. And the thing I appreciate about the Police are they're so distinct sounding. And I think whenever you hear a song by them, you know it's them right away. Whether it be something like Roxanne or Don't Stand So Close to Me or Message in a Bottle. It's a combination of their sound and Sting's voice, I think, that produces that. I guess that's the case for what they are, is their music and Sting's voice. But I think this album moves along pretty well, and I enjoyed kind of the rhythms of it and the feel. I feel like they're a really tight band. They sound jazzy at times, and they sound really well practiced, if that makes sense. The production is really good. Sting always has some sort of effect on his voice, or like echo. I think Matt said that as well. It seems like that's something they like to do, and the drums and the bass sound really crisp, and they incorporate all that kind of reggae and ska in interesting ways into their sound. They're pretty smooth sounding band too. There's not like what am I trying to say? They're not shaggy at all. They are their songs are driven by the rhythms, but the rhythms and the tempo aren't always lined up, if that makes sense. And they always have choruses in a lot of these songs that get stuck in your head, like in Canary in a Coal Mine or Don't Stand So Close to Me, do do do, da da da. I didn't really like the instrumental track on this, Voices. I think some of the lyrics too I find pretty silly. I'm not sure what they're talking about all the time, like on Bombs Away and Man in a Suitcase, things like that. That doesn't really work for me. Go ahead.
Bombs Away is apparently about the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan.
Okay. Oh,
it's a very silly time in the world, Josh.
Yeah, indeed. And so for our first exposure of an album for the Police, I liked it. I don't know if I think this is my favorite album of the group this week, but there's something also about this album that kind of keeps me at a distance. It's not something I loved right away, and I don't know if I will revisit this anytime soon, but I think that I don't know what I'm trying to say. I like the album. That's So
album good.
Well, unlike you guys, I know the Police catalog very well. I actually own all 5 Police albums, so they're in my inner circle of bands that I very much like. I have often described this is an interesting album because it's one of the odd bands where I feel that people either think this is the Police's best album or think it's their worst album. And I get it because it's an uneven album for me compared to the rest of the Police albums. I think that we're going to cover Ghost in the Machine and Synchronicity. So I would compare it to the first 2 albums that I think had more consistency on the albums. But this does have some of the best Police songs. I think Driven to Tears is a really top-notch Police song. Don't Stand So Close to Me suffers a little bit from maybe being overplayed at times. But with that being said, it's still just a very well put together song. I think I know that some people don't like the way it goes into the chorus, but I personally like it. To me, the Police are a 3-piece, but much like a Rush where there's 3 people and they all do certain things. The Police are that way, but what's really interesting about the Police is what all of their backgrounds are. Stuart Copeland drums like a jazz drummer and has a background in jazz, and the way he drums is not like a pop drummer. He plays powerfully, but he plays powerfully like a jazz drummer would play powerfully. He's got and every Police album sort of surfaces with his, you can't hear him without hearing like the hi-hat on the drums always, and sort of he has very interesting fills. He plays off time, so you've got him doing his thing. There aren't many people where there's a bassist-singer combination. In fact, I just mentioned Rush, and there's one of the bands like that. But Sting has a very interesting bass sound that I always thought is influenced by early in the Police's career reggae. I know Matt mentioned ska, but I don't hear ska. I hear dub, reggae and dub, but I don't hear ska on this as much. I hear more of a reggae sound. I mean, maybe sped up a little bit to make it dub, but there's no like pick it up type sound on this at all. There's reggae sounds to it. Punk rock also is a sonic element of this for sure. And early Police to me was always like, what happens if reggae meets punk? Okay, you've got like the Police doing one thing and you've got the Clash, doing it as well. So they're the 2 ends of it. So you got sort of Sting playing these sort of reggae Jamaican style bass lines, but also a little bit of, at times, the complicated nature of what jazz is as well, because he's another guy that jazz and classical were influences. And then later, it makes sense that he expands into world music, right? Because that's what's informing him. And then you've got Andy Summers, who I think Matt did a good job of explaining his guitar, that echo effect sort of on his guitar sound, but also not jangle in like the Rickenbacker type jangle, Byrds, REM, Johnny Marr, the Smiths type jangle, but there's a little bit of that jangle sound, but with an run through an echo effect would be how I would describe it. And the funny thing is, and a lot of this, I apologize, guys, I'm doing off top of my head, but I know a little bit to be able to add context. Andy Summers, I believe, is a decade older than Stuart Copeland and Sting.
I think that's, I remember that.
And he played in the British invasion bands in the late 60s and early 70s. So like his musical roots, it's interesting. He was, playing in the late 60s, and then here he joins this band in the late 70s. So he's traversed that, and you can see elements of how he plays that remind you of sort of British invasion garage rock style of compositions. His guitar is more traditional at times than the rest of the band, who's sort of trying to go more experimental. So there's always a creative tension in the Police because you see kind of people are trying to sort of vie for who's going to get the vibe of the song. And there are some albums where it really becomes apparent. The debut, Synchronicity, stuff like that. This one, they're a little bit more on the same page. I know famously Sting hates the song Behind My Camel. Andy Summers wrote it, and I know Sting he wouldn't play bass on it. He refused to play it, and so Andy Summers had to play both the guitar and the bass in the song. So it's the rare song that Andy Summers wrote. I think Stuart Copeland wrote a couple. I know he wrote "Bombs Away" on this one, and I'm pretty sure he wrote another song here, but I don't know. It's not any of the big hits, but there's another one on here. I think
the
one
Camel
of the later
song
songs.
definitely that stands out as being kind of off. From
Well, because Stuart Copeland and Sting have some of the same reference points, right? Where Andy Summers was the guy who joined them later and had different reference points, so it makes sense when you think about it.
Wrote everything except "Bombs Away," which Copeland wrote. Summers wrote "Behind My Camel," and Copeland also wrote the last song, "The Other Way of Stopping." So both instrumentals were written by dudes other than Sting.
Right. Okay. Gotcha. So, I mean, there's no bad Police albums, and it's very interesting because I think, as Matt said, a lot of people think of the Police as a greatest hits band because they have a lot of hits, and people also forget how big the Police were in their time. They were banging out hits, and they crossed over to America. You figure that only one of the three members is American, Stuart Copeland. The other two are British. So they were one of the most successful crossover bands, certainly of the late 70s. I mean, they crossed over at a level that bands before them that we now celebrate, like The Clash, right, didn't cross over like that, and later seminal bands. We're going to cover The Cure and the Smiths and stuff, and they had their moments, but they certainly didn't cross over like the Police did. So they managed to find it, in a way that other groups didn't do. But yeah, I like this album but it is a little bit uneven compared to most Police albums. But I always appreciate their willingness to sort of do the equivalent of dumpster dive on genres. So. Yeah, that's how I describe it.
I have a question. So if I'm not hearing ska in "Man in a Suitcase" or "Canary in a Coal Mine," what am I hearing?
I mean, I guess you could call it like that like upbeat, and I guess you could call it
because that's what I'm hearing. Like they're both upbeat and they're both on the offbeat, and that's kind of what I mean. Reggae to me is the slower version of that. I don't know what dub is. Although I think we hear it on when Sandinista. I know that term appears on there, and I don't know exactly
everything on Sandinista.
That's fair.
Literally
that's
every type of music
point.
on earth. So yeah, I mean,
so I don't know exactly. I don't know how to distinct. I don't know what that means exactly, but those when I said ska, pretty much those are the two. I think those are the two main songs I was referring to.
Well, and it makes sense because "Man in the Suitcase" gets covered by ska bands at different times. So I mean, dub is like a version of reggae. And if you took reggae and you took electronic music and you fused where reggae and electronic music meets, that's dub. I like Lee Scratch Perry. It's interesting that we're covering all these albums because like Lee Scratch Perry is the guy I think of with dub, and obviously he was all over Sandinista. And that's kind of how I'd describe it's usually no lyrics and very rhythm section driven with like it's hard for me to describe. There's like a producer element to it. The polish of this album?
Yeah.
The Police album, that's a little bit of what dub has going for it too, that there's a producer element to it.
And did dubstep come out of dub?
Yes.
Matt, I don't think you can have ska without horns. So what you're hearing is just like
I mean,
just the upbeat.
I know.
I'm talking about the upbeat nature, because the main thing about ska is upbeat, and it's on the guitar strumming on the offbeat, and then you throw the horns in, which definitely makes it ska. But the rhythm of that, the style is what I'm hearing. So ska has
the walking bass line though. Is the biggest thing with ska. Period.
The biggest thing with ska is a walking bass line.
Yes,
I have no idea what I'm talking about then, because I don't think about that. I think about
rhythms on
offbeat,
offbeats and walking bass lines. Yeah, that's like ska.
And I think horns too. But okay,
lots of it. But like, there's plenty of third wave ska bands that don't have a ton of horns. Mm-hmm. So yeah. So
I guess
I know it's kind of like
at the end of the day, I know what you're talking about, Matt. It's just there's that certain.
You're just trying to make everybody see that I don't know what I'm talking about, Josh, which is true, But I'm trying to figure it out.
Had
but yet,
this conversation before.
I know.
We'll have it again.
Yes, I was about to say. I feel like we've had this conversation before. But we'll keep revisiting it as Matt learns. So
what we need? There's probably a YouTube video that breaks it down that we'll have to.
Yeah,
I think Matt needs to listen to like multiple weeks of ska and dub and reggae to like increase it, and I think that will finally cure him.
It'll be like, I've got it.
Yes, it comes out
Eureka.
like the hair up in the air, just with the
Einstein.
Wikipedia says dub is also or originates from rocksteady.
We get another sub-song.
Reggae, electronic ska, and rocksteady. Rocksteady. So
I will not attempt to describe rocksteady because I don't have the words for that one. I did my best with the others, but yeah.
So do you feel like the Police evolve in their sound at all, or are they always kind of eclectic?
For
like
sure.
this?
I mean, every breath you take,
that's true.
doesn't sound like anything on the first 3 albums. Synchronicity 2 doesn't sound like much on these albums. You'll notice immediately on like something like Spirits in the Material World on Ghost in the Machine, like where their influences sort of shift to. But they always like to shift genres, always. So
they get a little more synthy too.
Yeah, I think of their first 3 albums as having distinct similarities.
Okay.
There's growth, but they have similar. It's that punk, reggae, pop combo, that really informs them. Whereas the 4th and 5th album, and I don't want to go too much into them because we're going to talk about them, but while they keep some of it, don't get me wrong, they clearly are trying to do something different.
Understood.
Mm-hmm. Any
right.
final thoughts on Zenyatta Mondatta?
I don't think so.
No.
Thumbs up. I liked it.
Yep. Josh, thoughts?
Yeah, I liked it too.
And I would give it a thumbs up too. But the best is both in the past and yet to come in some ways, in my opinion. So,
Okay.
So this was your least favorite, you'd say, John?
well, let's listen to all of them before historically, and I've said this.
Well, the
in
other 2 we're
times
not
in
getting to, so yeah, I just don't know about the other 2.
I should listen to them again just to reinforce it. But I mean, I've listened to those albums all quite a few times, and I felt pretty confident that this would be my 5 of 5 in theirs. Yeah. Because I don't love the song do 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 da da da, the instrumentals. It's kind of, there's some in here that are not my favorite.
Would you like that song better if the song wasn't called do 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 da da da?
No, I mean,
the chorus was so dopey.
I understand it though, because it's not like it's basically like when it's a love song. So like when I see this person, like I have no words, and it's kind of like I'm saying like do do do. So it's not like I'm total eye rolling, but it doesn't mean I really want to hear it either.
Yeah.
And, as much as I love the Police, I wouldn't say that Sting is a top tier lyric writer for me. Like he's kind of like, I read Lolita this week, and so Don't Stand So Close to Me kind of came out of that. And I was watching this. Well, I guess it was Stuart Copeland who's like, I was watching the news, and how about this stuff in Afghanistan? Let's make a song called Bombs Away. But music, I can't believe I'm going to say this, Matt, but really what brings me to the table with the Police is the music more so than lyrics.
Me too, John.
I know. So maybe we'll find like the parallel world with that. Like so it's really that's why Bob Dylan always fascinates me with him. You know what I mean? Because literally, Bob Dylan for me is all lyrics. So it's kind of.
No, I disagree with that. But I challenge anybody.
Well, of course you do, but it's still baffling. Let's make no mistake about it. There's very few people who are like, if Dylan didn't have this music, it's the lyrics can't really carry him through. So. Or maybe I drove him to tears, Josh.
Yeah. So. Do you feel like the early Police bands or albums they're like rougher, like a lot of early bands albums are?
The first one production wise isn't nearly as clear, but I mean, I could tell you what Roxanne sounds like, and what probably So Lonely sounds like.
Oh,
right.
And that's on those.
And those
album?
are on the first album.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
okay.
Those are on the first album, and second has like Message in a Bottle, and they bring the production on. I'm trying to think of songs that you would. Walking on the Moon is on the second album. I'm trying to think of other songs that you would know. That.
Yeah. I mean, thinking back to Roxanne, even that is pretty.
It's raw.
It's raw, but it sounds like well rehearsed and crisp.
Well, they're a very musically talented band. I mean, you know, like I said, they were notorious for their practices, you know, and how disciplined they were in the studio. It was just, you know, they don't hate each other anymore, but for a long time.
Oh, they don't?
No, they kind of made their peace at Sting's wedding. They just didn't want to play together anymore. It was kind of like, you know, it's like, I don't know if we've grown to like accept each other, but we also don't need that level of stress in our lives. And then they were all like, we could use a little bit more money. So I'm sure we could have that stress in our lives for 9 months. But that was kind of always what it was. I mean, when you see interviews with them, they're just fighting each other at the interviews. It's kind of like if the three of us just ripped on each other passive aggressively and sometimes aggressive. Because Sting is a lot like, Sting and Stuart Copeland is kind of like me and Matt, and like Andy Summers is kind of like you, Josh, in that he is kind of in between. And you know how Matt and I sometimes take the piss out of each other and there's a little edge to it? That's kind of like Sting and Stuart Copeland. But probably Matt would be the Sting in that, and I would be the Stuart Copeland in that in terms of temperament. So,
oh, man, so am I going solo?
Eventually, I think you would be the one who would go solo. I
dream of rain. Man, he felt... Can we talk about Sting falling off, by the way? Just like...
lose my faith in you.
Or the Three Musketeers song that he did with Rod Stewart and Bryan Adams.
Yes.
His best work, in my opinion, is deeply couched in The Police. Yes, for sure.
I would second that.
Yes, and and his cover of
sex.
Yes, and yes, and the ability to fuck for 12 hours. So all right. Well, it's a shame none of this is going to get in the podcast because this would be
it's all going
quality
in.
Content. Yeah, you could just cut it. Like you could just say, "Hello, Matt dropped off, and we were riffing a little bit." So here's tantric sex, world music, and the Police. Yeah, that's kind of later career Sting. And Little Drummer Boy, right? He covers that, I think. Yeah. So, all right. So, segment 1 is in the books. We have covered the Police. We've got a lot of the bands this week. It's another.
They're all British too.
I was going to say, I think it's another, with the exception of Stuart Copeland, right? Everybody else is British. And I think we did this before where we had nothing but the bands, and we're doing it again because we have The Jam this week, who we have covered before, all mod cons, in the COVID special, where Josh and I covered Big Star × 2 and then The Jam.
Oh, that's right. I forgot that. I think I said in the intro that it's the first time we're covering The Jam. I forgot that you guys did that one already, so my bad.
Well, you did it last week, too.
I know, it's twice. I keep forgetting about it.
I'm going to have to give you note cards or something, Matt.
I'm off, guys. I had surgery yesterday. I'm a little off my game. I'm still the effects of the anesthesia's on me.
Now you have vision like a hawk, right?
Not quite yet. It's going to take a while to set it in a little bit.
Put the hawk sound effect there, John. So now maybe we'll give Matt the nickname the Hawk.
I'm the Hawk.
That stock eagle sound that they play
Wasn't
in westerns and stuff.
Isn't that the punk kid in Cobra Kai? Isn't he Hawk? I'm that guy.
Is he? I don't know.
Sure.
Yeah, the guy with the
Matt's
mohawk?
clearly still riffing off whatever the good shit was they gave him right there. So I think what we should do is whenever Matt is riffing and we're like, is Matt all the way with us? Josh, just put the hawk sound on and it'll be awesome. It'll sound fantastic. They're like, wow, that guy could do a hawk sound like that. So, yeah.